Welcome to Not About You Season 2. If this is the first time you've listened to Not About You, thanks for listening. There's an entire first season of shows that I hope you'll check out. Each episode of this show features a guest discussing some aspect of their own identity, their own lived experiences, that they'd maybe like to stop having to explain all the time. I'm your host, Levi Weinhagen, and just as in Season 1, I'm a white, straight, hetero, cisgendered man trying to grow in my understanding of lived experiences other than my own. I also still love making jokes, and I'm kind of an idiot, so I'm very open to feedback. Find me online or hit me with an email, napod@gmail.com. This is Not About You.
My name is Kareem Tabsch. I am a documentary filmmaker and a film programmer. I identify as a queer Latino artist.
Thanks for talking to me today, Kareem. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for asking me to talk.
One thing I wanted to highlight also is, because I've mostly in this show, in this project, talked to folks from the Midwest, is that you were born and grew up in Miami, correct?
Yep. I'm a Miami native. Those of us who are Miami natives make a point of saying born and raised in Miami. And somebody's pointed this out recently, and I don't really know why we do it other than the fact that so many people are not from Miami who live in Miami.
Oh, yeah.
But yeah, born and raised in Miami.
And so you, to me, not only you mentioned like you are a film curator, but you also direct. Have you done only documentary film making?
I have. I always think that reality is so much stranger than fiction.
Yeah.
That the wealth of material is nonstop, particularly living in Florida. But I'm certainly thinking a lot about trying to go down a narrative route, and it's kind of scary, I have to say. So I don't know if I'm ready for it yet, but I'm super curious about it. I think that creating a magical different world sounds great, but maybe I'm not creative or smart enough to do that. Maybe I just need to I'm smart enough to figure out, wow, that's a really weird, great story. I should tell it.
Connected to that, part of the sort of weirdness of that, I think, is you're describing being comfortable telling someone else's story, but you're nervous about telling your own story, because that's what a fictional work would be, is a story that you, at least in some part, came up with, as opposed to trying to communicate the story of someone else. Does that sound like part of the tension?
I think that that's accurate. I think that there's, I describe myself as self-taught. I didn't go to school as a filmmaker, and I embarked in kind of this career in film first kind of managing a film festival, and then kind of naturally going into film curation. But my filmmaking didn't happen until I was well already in the film world, and it took a lot of support and convincing from friends. I describe it as close collaborators and supporters who gave me permission to own my identity as a filmmaker and encouragement. So I think that there's still quite often I have a lot of anxiety around it. I enjoy my work and I'm really proud of it, but I think I certainly have at times imposter syndrome, and I'm like, should I really be in this room? I'm just this kid from Miami who decided I'm going to make a weird movie, but a pampered cat or a man and a dolphin, and I have said in recent years I definitely have owned that, but I think that maybe the progression to narrative storytelling, which is something that interests me, is maybe just that next step in my own comfort with my art.
Yeah. Well, so you mentioned the word identity, which is sort of the thing for me. That's a thing I want to talk about with you. I'm curious if, because one of the big things you do with O Cinema and the work it seems like you do in the world is not only create space for other people to share a part of their identity, but maybe do some encouraging of people to embrace components of their identity. How much is that informed by your understanding of yourself? Or do you pull from the trajectory of, were you aware when you were growing up that you were queer and Latino, and were you in a space where that was viewed as abnormal? Or what was the tension for those parts of your identity when you were young, and does it translate to you sort of helping people share parts of themselves with their art now.
Yeah, it's interesting because I think that in some ways it's very representation on the screen and creating a space for that is really the cornerstone of our work at O Cinema, and not exclusively, right? We just want to present. We always say we want to present the best in independent cinema, contemporary independent cinema from around the world, but ensuring the representation it really is the cornerstone of the work. Part of that, I think, is subconscious. Creating the opportunity for other people to do so is very subconscious because of my personal experience growing up. Part of it is very much a conscious decision that we must do this because nobody else is doing it and because it's important. But how it ties back to myself growing up, I mean, I grew up in Miami. Miami is a minority-majority city. 60% of the population speaks Spanish as their first language. A lot of our elected officials are of primarily Cuban or Haitian or African-American background, and that's sometimes less or more. But so my Latino identity was not ever something I completely questioned. I'm half Cuban, half Lebanese. There's not a huge Arabic community in Miami, though it exists kind of through the diaspora of Arabs throughout Latin America who eventually settled in Miami. But certainly with my queerness and just as much about being gay as much as about knowing that I was an artist or an art lover was such a equally as a difficult part of my identity to embrace growing up, because I'm first generation American. My parents, like many immigrants, my was like, "You're going to be a doctor or a lawyer. Which one would you like to be?" And I'm like, "Doctor, I guess. Even if I don't like people, but I like money, but I don't like school." That didn't work out.
That's not the doctor I want.
Right. So, fair. Mostly the ones I get, though. Yeah. So. Being gay was certainly something that was a difficult part of my journey growing up, and having parents that necessarily understood it and hid it for a long time, but also just being being somebody who wanted a life in the arts. And I knew that. I would say that I knew that probably around the same time I knew I was gay. I mean, it was this other part of my identity. I don't think it actually first made gay people there are in the arts. I don't think one thing had anything to do the other with me, but it was almost just as inconceivable to my family. I didn't grow up, I never visited a museum with my parents. We didn't have that experience. My exposure to the world of film and the arts was thanks to PBS. I grew up watching, it was called The Movies at 2, and there were all these great old movies, and they transported me to these other worlds that I didn't know existed, because my Miami was very different than the one that everybody else would see. The flashy images of neon-lit streets on the screen, of South Beach, the Golden Girls, Miami Vice, Scarface, The Birdcage, all those things, which are based on some stereotypical truth, were very different than my existence in a, primarily African-American and Latino working-class neighborhood. I lived next door to a housing project. So it was very, very different for me. So the life in, being gay was certainly a challenge and a tough part of my identity, but knowing that there was an artist inside of me or somebody who wanted a life in the arts was in many ways just as difficult for me. So now in the O Cinema prism, when we look at, what we do, part of it is very subconscious and natural, creating opportunities to encourage people because that's what you should do. I mean, that just seems to me so natural. Just I don't question that. But, and I think about it, I think a lot of it absolutely comes back to the fact that growing up, I didn't have that. I mean, my parents weren't ogres. I make them sound like these are awful people that took me to a museum, and just beat me into becoming a doctor, which didn't work. They weren't like that at all, but it just wasn't. It wasn't part of. It wasn't part of their world, and thus not part of mine. So in many ways, it's very subconscious when we do things at O Cinema to encourage artists. We do it because it's the right thing to do. But I absolutely think when I spend time thinking about it, that it comes back from my experience growing up.
So there's this stereotype that intertwined with being gay is there's a lean towards the arts. And I'm curious if you've ever bumped up against that, both has being an artist made it so people are less questioning of your queerness, or has being queer made it like? Do you feel like one gave you a better in your growing up and in your neighborhood when you were like, I'm gay and I'm really into sort of making art? Do you think there was a strength in the both of them were able to make it so no one could just point out your one difference because you had these combined differences? Was there anything to that?
I like to add to the fact, the other details, I'm fat, and I was a fat kid. And, it sounds funny, but it's true. Yeah. I physically looked different. I was...
And that was not the norm.
No, absolutely not. No, like, everybody was... I looked different. I was gay. I was into, like, these weird arts. And nobody was into, like, these old movies and theater and stuff. I didn't play sports as much as I wasn't interested in it, as equally to the fact that I just wasn't good at it. I was like this big kid. Everybody's like, "Oh, you should be a running back." I'm like, "What do? You run? No, I'm not interested. I don't want to run. Or do you think I'm fat in the first place?" So,
because people are, I mean, it's also a Miami stereotype, but like everyone is gorgeous there. Like when I walk in Miami, even today, I'm still like, this is not fair.
I like to describe it as it's a great place to question your sexuality, whether you're gay or straight. Or like as a gay man, I walk down the street, I'm like, oh my god, she is amazing. Yeah. What? Maybe this gay thing isn't all it's cracked up to be. And then there's a guy who walks in the opposite direction, like, oh no, wait, it's a pretty image conscious city in many ways. In many subconscious ways, actually. I don't think everybody's just trying to do it to get looks, but it is. It's easier in like the working class neighborhoods where people definitely have all different body types, but in the arts and in the spaces that I kind of coexist in now, everybody's gorgeous, everybody's great, and I'm still like, the fat gay guy in the room, which is okay. I'm owning it. Let me make an impression. But as a kid, I mean, so that was just another thing that kind of added to this sense of alienation, and I don't describe it as probably as drastic as other people who articulated about it. So I don't think that, I guess I say that to say that it was when I eventually came out I don't think anybody was that surprised because I was already the weird kid, I was the weird fat kid who didn't play sports and, had no idea who, I can't even come up with a good example. I had no idea who Snoop Dogg was when I was a kid. That was nobody might know. But really, like, had no idea what, like, everybody was listening to music-wise, because I wasn't listening to that. Like, just didn't have a good sense of current pop culture, because I was, like, obsessed with pop culture from 30 years prior, and was gay. So I wasn't talking about, like, the girl down the block. So I think that kind of overall contributed to it, and not one more than the other. Was it surprising? In many ways, I think that being in the arts as a man comes with this automatic assumption that you're gay. So it works really well if you are gay, because then it makes it much easier. Like, well, of course you're gay, but I think it's much harder if you're a straight guy in the arts, and they're like, oh, you're heterosexual.
Thank you for saying that.
Yes, I'm sure.
My plate is real.
I totally believe it. I totally believe it. I think it's a real thing. It's much easier being gay in the arts. I think it's much more difficult being gay and a mechanic.
Yeah.
One of my closest friends is a gay mechanic, and those are just two different parts of his identity. It all kind of coexists for me, and it did also growing up. I don't know if one made the other easier. In many ways, it just was another odd thing about me growing up. As I get older, I think they're all kind of just like, they're all wonderful parts about me. They're such a part of my identity now. So, I don't even know if that answers your question. I feel like I'm rambling there.
I'm going to ask you like a way on the nose question.
Okay, yeah, that.
You exist in multiple spaces that all have tremendous stereotypes and are like, we're in the middle of a climate where a lot of your identity sort of buckets we're like still or once again allowed to like openly malign. So gay is weird, where like there's been a bunch of weird progress, like a lot of marriage equity progress, but to the backfiring degree of like, that problem's solved now, we don't have to advocate for you anymore.
Right.
You're Latino, and while that is pretty common in South Florida, there's still this sort of countrywide dialogue about whether you should be here, even though you are from here, but you're still sort of put into that bucket. And then, as you said, like, you're a fat person, and that's like the only group that we can like spit on in public, and everyone's like, hey, maybe they'll learn to take care of themselves. Like, there's this horrible narrative that we talk about the obesity problem with no awareness that like everyone's bodies are literally different, but we still get to go like, you're a bad person because you look this way.
Right.
So I am curious, are you encountering experiences in those zones on a daily basis now in your life? And like, or is your mind like having to be in a place of readiness for that? Because you openly talk about this stuff. And you are a curator, but there's a level of protector, too, of those identities. So I wonder if that means you feel like you have to have a thicker skin to protect yourself, but also you have to be exposed to take some shots to make space for the other people who share some of those identities with you.
Absolutely, and I would add to that that my name is Kareem Tabsch.
Right,
I'm half Arabic. I have this Arabic problem. I've had hilarious and awful experiences throughout the years because of that. And I'm in the arts, and all of those things come with they come with baggage. I mean, some of it's wonderful, and a lot of it is challenging. I think that I'm 37 years old, and I like to say that my success is it's not a financial success, but it's the successes that I've created, the world that I kind of want to inhabit, and for better or worse, I've maybe insulated myself from some things by surrounding myself with like-minded people. And in many ways, my work is quite the opposite. It is, as you pointed out, it is very raw, and it is owning these labels that are part of who I am. Growing up and living in a city like Miami, I think that some of these things are a little easier for me in a local basis. Like, being Latino is not a conversation that we have to have in a way in Miami. I think it's much more difficult to be a black person or to be Afro-Caribbean, because while that's as much as a quarter of the population, and it's still underrepresented, and there's a lot of brown on black prejudice that we still deal with. So that part of my identity is not difficult. I live in a very, Miami's not necessarily the most homosexual city, but it's very gay. So it's, I get away with...
I want you to articulate.
Yeah, absolutely. So that does not become as difficult. In some ways, I've created there's like a small bubble that I inhabit that I protect myself from because of my friends, because of my lifestyle, because of the field that I'm in. But my work is actually, whether it's programming at O-Cinema or creating, documentary film projects or talking about these things, forces me outside of that bubble, and that's when kind of the reflection really happens. So in some ways, I don't deal with it in my day-to-day life. I certainly don't. I think all of these buckets, being Latino, being gay, being fat, being of Middle Eastern ancestry, being in the arts, they inform how I approach things day in and day out in a very subconscious way. When I'm outside of Miami, I think it all becomes much more evident to me. I probably now have a little more antsy now when I travel.
You're talking to me in Minnesota.
I'm talking to you in Minnesota, and
but you stand out a little more.
Yeah, I'd say a hell of a lot more. Yeah, absolutely. So much so that, I do this thing. I'm bilingual. I speak Spanish pretty fluently.
You don't have to brag.
Yeah. There's a great bilingual joke in there, but this is a classy show.
Yeah, come on.
And I'm not bringing it down. But I speak to people, I encounter Latino people, and I'll say something like, hola, ¿cómo estás? And they're like, wait, what? You don't look like you should speak Spanish, or nobody speaks Spanish just in the streets here. And that's happened in this trip a few times. So when I leave my comfort zone, and I think that's so important, physically and mentally and in your work, I am forced to encounter that more, and there's a sense of responsibility that comes with it. I encounter all of those things often in my family, which I am not super close to, but close enough. We're not hanging out all the time, but their view of the world is still very different. I always describe it as they don't have an understanding of what I do or who I am. They just kind of nod, and it's like, that's nice. It's like,
are there specifics, specific experiences around that?
You
can speak to?
Yeah, I mean, the funny story I like to tell is that my dad has passed a few years ago now, but after we opened O-Cinema, he asked me, he's like, so what did you guys do? You show adult movies? And I said, no, No, why would you think? No, why would you think that? Like, what? This is what you think I do? Really? Like, you haven't.
Are there cinemas like that still?
Very little. We're the only thing we're cleaning up with the mop is popcorn on the floor. Is
it because of the O?
Right, that's a very good point. I do that, but that's like a perfect example.
And was that because of your sexuality, do you think?
No, I just think that this is such a different world. Like this world of life in the arts, this world of, where I live in the center of the city, we grew up in the suburbs. Like so much of what my life embodies is so different from the rest of my family. It's really interesting. I live in the little Haiti neighborhood of Miami. And there's absolutely like this family like, why are you moving there? It's full of Haitian people. And it was one, this articulation of like, oh, it's so different. And then two of like, what we always wanted to move into white neighborhoods. Like, wasn't that the whole point? And it's so different from my view of the world that I think that I encounter. So I feel like I encounter those changes, those challenges to my identity more often within my own family when I'm in Miami than otherwise. But when I step out of the city, I think I do have to be a representative. And I feel like at first it was really exhausting, and now it's really liberating because I think my manner is very conversational. You can ask me whatever you want, even if it's going to offend me. I try not to be very threatening, and I'm not easily threatened. So
that's interesting to me. You don't seem, I've spent not a ton of time with you, but like, you don't seem easily intimidated. Well, I don't get any aggression from you, but I also don't get like you are grounded in a sense of self. Do you think you had to be?
I absolutely do. I think that harkens back to a previous question. Yeah, you asked, do I need thicker skin? And I think I did. And I think that it naturally developed because of living in all of these boxes, right? I think I did have to develop thicker skin if I wanted to survive. I grew up in a rough neighborhood, and, I wasn't going to be slanging on the streets. That wasn't me. So I had to learn to like take more. I also had to learn how to push back. Thankfully, my partner likes to say that I seek out confrontation. And I always have to say, it's like, I don't seek it out, but I won't shy away from it. I won't allow myself to be pushed. I think I had enough of that as a kid growing up. And again, not as bad as so many others. I had enough of that now as an adult, I tend not to shy away from speaking back. And if it has to get aggressive in a way of defending myself and defending others, I'm absolutely okay with that. But generally, I have a much more laid back approach to it. And I think that's made it easier for me.
Laid back aggressive.
Well, it's like, yeah, exactly. I'm a laid back aggressive. Like, I will, we're going to get into a fight, but I'm going to finish my drink first.
Yeah. Which is actually really intimidating. Right? You seem real calm. Yeah. You must have some skills.
None. Verbal and, I'm going to probably physically lose in the fight.
But the willingness to have the fight seems like a huge part of how to succeed.
I unfortunately, I just think it's unnecessary. And I mean, and the fight is, I feel like...
What are you fighting for? Tell me that.
The fight is for equal space, I feel. The fight is for an equal voice. The fight is for saying that this is who I am, these are who these people are, and our viewpoints, our outlook of the world, our role in the world and in our community is just as valid as yours, no matter how different we are. And you might think one thing, and that's perfectly valid. You're allowed to have your opinions, even if they're wrong. But I don't have to accept them if they are, if they're disrespectful, if they're not equitable for my place in the world, and for those like me. And that's the fight. And this, this thought that you just have to take what's given to you because you're different than the majority. That you have to just take the plate that's served to you because at least you're getting something. I don't think it's right. I don't approach my interaction with other people that way, and I don't expect people to approach their interaction.
Well, I feel like the work you're doing gives you a really straightforward context to address this thing that I will pose to you, which is this idea that, hey, the movie that is going to sell the most tickets should win. Why do we have to... I don't want to see those movies. I know you get this from people who live near your theaters, especially when you're starting them. I don't want to see this weird movie. Why won't you show a movie I want to see? someone who hasn't had to experience this, like, you know what, the movies they show are the movies that people want to see. So I think my question is, which seems like a basic one, is like, why does that representation matter? Why do you feel like it's so important to create space for things that people aren't overtly clamoring for, which I think is part of the framing of this idea? Because when I say people, I think I mostly mean like the majority of people who have the money to go see a movie will go see this movie.
And there's plenty of places for them to do that. and we do get this, you know. Look, you know, we get, is there a real movie theater nearby?
Nice.
And I have to always say, well, this is a real movie theater. Like, oh, I mean, you know, where can I see Guardians of the Galaxy? And my response is, anywhere. Yeah. Just not here. You know? And there's nothing wrong with those films, and I love those films. But, they're, you know, much like, you know, it's a perfect example of just kind of our country and our world. Like, they are part of a mainstream culture and easily accessible. I mean, you can, in most places, drive less than 15 minutes and get to a movie theater where you're going to see all of that kind of entertainment, and it's great. But there is
And I think, I will let you go, but I think one thing you said that was really important is you're not mad at those places.
No, I think
there's an either-or thing that happens.
No, there's absolutely not. No.
Like, you go see those movies too.
Listen, if you ask me what I'll do in a weekend that I have nothing to do, I will rewatch Star Wars or Harry Potter or Lord of the Rings beginning to end, nonstop, 10 hours a day for like 2 or 3 days, and I am in like seventh heaven. It's wonderful, it's escapism, and we can have tons of conversations about it. Those things need to exist, and you know, and so does The Hangover, and so does everything, right? Like, there's a place for that. There's a place for, I recently got into a discussion about, you know, art versus entertainment, and I do think that they can be two different things. They don't have to be the same thing. But there's a place for that, and it's important. It's you know, it's equally as important, I think. You know, you want to go someplace and just escape the world. But that's not necessarily what we sought out to do with cinema. We didn't want you to escape the world. We wanted you to discover it and confront it, and be challenged by it and be educated by it. And guess what? You could also be entertained at the same time. Because that's what good art does. It challenges, it inspires, it can entertain, and it provokes conversation. So, you know, we do get that quite a bit. We do get people who drop into the theaters and be like, why aren't you showing, you know, the new Steven Spielberg movie? And it's because you could see that anywhere. But what you can't see anywhere is, at least when we started showing, you can't see something like Moonlight, which is a fantastic film about an African-American young man discovering his sexuality in Miami, growing up in the inner cities of Miami. You didn't have an opportunity to see that everywhere. And that's important because, one, the people in that film, those characters represent, are important. They are our neighbors, they're our friends, they're our lovers, they're our brothers and sisters. And two, they're not being shown elsewhere. Right, they're not being equally represented. And I talk a lot about the power of representation on screen, the power of seeing yourself. It's a sense of validation. It's a sense of validation to be able to see yourself and know. It's almost like nodding and saying, yes, I do exist and others are identifying. And here's something that is attempting to contextualize my experience or the experience of those like me. Whereas mainstream culture primarily does not do that, because mainstream film culture, mainstream entertainment culture is very much interested in capturing the widest possible audience.
Did you say widest?
Widest. I knew that was going to happen. My lisp is coming back to me. But also, yes, frankly, the whitest possible audience too. And that's just because of the country we live in, which is primarily white. So there's not as much of an, and you know, that they want that because it equals dollars and revenue, and you know, shareholders are happy. So when we look at our programming, we very much look at, we want to ensure that the films represent a broad spectrum of the community, because I knew how powerful it was when I saw stories on the screen that represented me, be it gay me, Latino me, fat me, whatever it was. There was a power to that. It was a nod from somebody else that you exist. It's, you know, I feel like, you know, being in Minnesota or being in places where you're not Latino or you're not gay, it's not like the huge population. There's that nod that happens in the street when you encounter somebody who's like you. There's that, you just kind of nod to each other and it's I see you, I recognize you, you're like me. And I think that film does that and can do that and should do that. And we always wanted O Cinema to be a place that it did do that. We wanted it to be a place where those who were not being represented could come and see themselves, and those curious among us could come and discover something different from their own experiences. So when we show films, I'm very proud of the fact that we, as an independent artist in South Florida, we show more films about the Black experience than anyone else. And it's not that we're playing to solely Black audiences, but we're playing to people who are curious enough who are coming to see it. And I think that that's in many ways even more important. We just showed a film called I Am Not Your Negro, which is based on the work of James Baldwin. And
by a Haitian director, right? Or
by a Haitian director named Raoul Peck, a wonderful filmmaker. And it was interesting because a lot of my friends who were Black who saw it, you say, it's like, this is a great film. Every white person should see this. And there's that laugh, but it's truth. It's like, we're showing some of these films because we want other people to be able to see themselves on screen. But we also want other people to come in and explore and experience a world that is not their norm. And that's equally as important.
Well, that is really interesting to me because I know in my own personal journey of understanding that I'm of a specific culture inside of a larger culture, butted up against a number of other cultures, which there's an embarrassed part of me who's like, that is relatively new information to me because I did not have to go learn that.
Right.
And I think there's this weird chicken and egg problem of it was not normalized for me to go learn that. Like there was no real benefit or encouragement to do it. And it's way more work to go find it and seek it out. And one thing that I think is happening with places like what you're making and other, I think the arts world seems like the tip of the spear of that work of we're going to give you access in a little easier way into other people's experiences that you need to have in order to start thinking about how what you do affects people who aren't just like you. So like that, but that seems like slow work. How do you stay optimistic or motivated when you're embedded in your culture of artists who make work about underrepresented voices, show things like you screened Tangerine, I think, before almost anyone else. And that is layers upon layers of people you don't see on screen. Like you don't see trans folks on screen. That's brand new and telling those stories. So how do you, that feels like a big win, but then you walk out of that space and you're like, oh, there's still so much ground to cover. So like, are you an optimistic person? Or like, how do you stay in this zone of keeping your momentum when it could easily be defeating to do, you have to fight for funding just as an artist. Right. And then you're fighting for, and I have to fight for funding and I'm trying to get people to just listen to jokes. And that's actually easier to sell in a lot of ways than jokes by a person of color. Suddenly there's another layer of I don't know, this is going to make people uncomfortable, So how do you stay, how do you stay excited to keep going? And how does that win versus the fatigue of what you're doing?
I often would describe myself as a pessimist. And I think most times when you ask me, I would probably still do. And I'm definitely the grumpy cat in the office, the naysayer for most things.
But adorable.
But adorable. Thank you for pointing that out. I plan to put it on my business cards. Yeah, grumpy but adorable. Send emails too. And my partner tells me that I'm ever the optimist, and he's exhaustingly so. He said, and so I think that if I really think about it, I think I am rather optimistic. But more than that, I'm undeterred, and I think that is whether the cup is half full or it's half empty. I'm going to just keep going after it because there's just no time not to. You can't stop. The moment you stop, everything else comes in. And that is one of the challenging things about being in all these boxes and trying to represent all these boxes is that you can't give an inch because the moment you do, it will be taken over. So, I don't even think it's about optimism or pessimism. I think it's about believing in what you're doing, believing in doing the right thing. So the idea for me that we're showing, films that represent this wide swath of our community, that's the right thing to do. Sometimes it's challenging because sometimes it doesn't make a ton of money. And you question, I still have to keep the lights on. We have a staff that needs to get paid. I'm fat, so I like to eat. These are things that I need, these are things that require money.
Is that your pitch to funders sometimes?
Sometimes. When everything else doesn't, when representation doesn't work and creating safe spaces, I'm look, I'm fat.
We're running out of snacks.
I need to eat, and you need to give me a grant so that I can make sure that there's pasta at the end of the night.
Terrible.
It doesn't work.
If anyone gets mad about anything you said, that'll be the thing.
Yes.
Not all fat people are eating all the time.
No. And that's exactly what I'm trying to solve. As a fat person, I'm trying to make sure we are all eating all the time, at least me. No, but it's so my approach about it isn't about like maintaining optimism. It's about just doing the work and forging ahead regardless, because it is right, and I believe it is right, and it's important, and I know that it's important, and I don't have the time to stop thinking that. Along the way, you have to just be around people who are willing to challenge your notions and help point you in another direction so that you can reflect on how best to do your work and how to approach it differently and how to empower others. And that's all part of it. I don't know that optimism or pessimism comes into it in my case, because I think if I thought too much about it, then maybe those things would creep in, and I would be focusing too much about that and not about just doing it.
Right. So you're not doing the easiest thing, but it's because you don't have a choice.
Exactly. I've never explored the idea of like calling, like you hear, a nun or a priest, like I did this is my calling.
Yeah.
But in a way, I guess that's what it is. Like I do my work because I can't imagine doing anything else, and not all. I don't want to neither diminish or self-aggrandize. And not all of it's like all this important work, right? Sometimes we're just showing things that are fun, because that's equally as important, because you need a respite from the craziness of the world. But I believe in the space that we create, and whenever I do get discouraged, because it does happen when you have 10 butts in a seat where there should be 100, it's the audience feedback that keeps you going. It's people saying, thank you for showing this. I monitor like our social media, which is the best thing about it has been the feedback. And I can't tell you how many times, just probably in the last 6 months more than in a long time, when we showed back-to-back the films Moonlight and I Am Not Your Negro, how many times people just commented, thank you, O Cinema, for bringing this. Thank you, O Cinema. I went to see this at O Cinema because it was the only place in town that's showing it. And that is immensely gratifying. And that reminds me that what I'm doing is important, that this calling of creating a space was the right one for me, and that even though being a doctor was paid a lot more, which would have been nice, that I made the right choice.
Right, you got to find the doctors who want to support the work you're doing because they wish they had done it. Like that's
exactly.
That's the magic trick.
All of them have told me that. All of them have told me I made the right choice in not becoming a doctor. They all say that while driving a BMW. However.
Yeah. So proud of you, man. I wish I had your life.
Yeah, exactly.
Gotta go.
Call you back when I get back from St. Bart's. Yeah.
That I don't think this is exactly what you're saying, but maybe like as we move towards wrapping up, there can be a condescension when people are being supportive of the work you're making and the work you're doing, because you are a condescension, and then also there's sort of the tokenization piece. So like, there are certainly times when you get maybe access to funding or resources because people need to tick a diversity box on who they're supporting. And I'm sure that can be uber frustrating, but then also it's sort of like, well, you use the weapons you have to fight the fight. I wonder how much you bump into like overt disrespect around not only just like who you are as a person, but like the work you're engaged in doing, where you have to, like how often you have to decide, because like as you said, you don't really back down from a fight, but then there's other times where like maybe no one's picking a fight, but there's some gray space of like, I think you're engaging with our work for the wrong reasons. Like I wonder if you run into that, if there's anything you have to do around that.
Ultimately I feel like I don't care. I just want you to engage in the work.
Oh,
and
sure.
if that means you're writing us a check to support because you need to check a box, well, that's great, because that's going to allow us to do what we do. What we do is important. Where I think it's more important, where I think I hope to have an effect on, is to shift the paradigm with which people are looking at that. So whether it's foundation or grant support or state support or just people coming out. I mean, what I really hope to do is that we can challenge the notion that this is just a box that they need to check, versus that this is something that they need to experience because it's just as real, just as important as anything else. And we define our communities and our excellence in ways that might be different than yours. So Is there a certain level of disrespect that comes along with it? At times, at times, interesting. I feel like we cultivate a very open, liberal, smart audience. But certainly, sometimes we get pushback. Like, hey, why is there so many of this? I remember when we showed, and this is just because of the release strategy, we showed The Danish Girl and Carol, 2 films back to back, and one was about a transgender character, and one was about a lesbian romance, and we got like a hate mail, and we've gotten a few of these. There's just one that sticks back, and this really got a crazy message was like, there's plenty of straights up in here. Serve the majority, not the minority, and that was like their last sentence, all in bold. And it's interesting, we showed those works because one, it was important, the representation was important. 2, because they were good films. And those are equally as important. Like, artistic excellence is always at the center of what we do, and I don't think you necessarily have to give one up in order to fill another of the boxes, right? Certainly not the representation, because there's wonderful work being made in all these communities. So there's a certain level of disrespect that comes, but part of that I feel is the other part of my work that we don't, maybe I haven't talked enough about, which is the education. Part of what we do is about educating people and about being educated ourselves. Like, we're training new audiences to not look at, it's not even just about looking at film in a different way. It's about looking at the world around them in a different way. And we're just using film to have that conversation. Mm-hmm. So those things are difficult. Challenging your own perceptions or challenging the notions of other people, that's going to be hard work. It's going to be frustrating. It's going to come with many challenges, and it's going to come with moments of discomfort, moments of tension and unease, moments where you're going to feel disrespected, moments where people are going to feel like you're disrespecting them. But, it's about the destination, not necessarily the journey in that case. And the destination is creating an artistic ecosystem and really a culture of equity for all people and of common grounds, and a place where we can celebrate one another, our differences, our similarities, and our experiences, and recognizing our privileges, recognizing our disadvantages, and recognizing our and everyone else's realities. So, yeah, sometimes it's frustrating, but, it's the work.
I really like the idea of someone saying, serve the majority, not the minority, in a majority-minority city, where, like, by serving any minority voice, you kind of are serving the majority, because there isn't one main big bucket.
I mean, this was a whole other conversation. This person was Latino who sent this email. I know it by the name, and so that's a whole other conversation that we could get into. But yeah, absolutely. I mean, there are times where you could just shake your head. I mean, and that, as angry as that got me when I got it, I laugh about it now because I was like, wow, you live in this other universe, and you might think that the rest of the world is like this, and you know what? It's not. A lot of it is, but don't take everybody else for granted, and particularly not in this city. And not recognizing your own privilege. And in that case, it's a perfect example. This was somebody who was Latino.
Yeah.
And didn't recognize the ridiculousness of their comment, because they are part of that minority that they're trying to push other people into. It's frustrating.
I wonder how much of that reaction is just, I got a confused boner. Like, I didn't know what to do. Yeah. Yeah, I know that's reductive, but that's...
Right. It could very well be. It could very well be. And then at that point, I feel like I should have charged them twice the amount of the tickets.
Right.
Because you got 2 times the experience here, buddy. So really, you should be paying more. Drop a little money to the donation bucket on your way out. Ultimately, you do got to laugh about it.
Yeah.
Yeah. The world is much too serious sometimes to be always taken seriously.
Well, Kareem, where can people go on the internet to find both what's happening with OCinema and to connect with you directly, or even to find your work? Because we didn't talk about it a lot, but you have made some lovely short documentary films that really do carry this sort of kindness, that are sharing sort of stories that you don't hear places in really lovable ways. So where can people find your work and find your theater? Yeah,
absolutely. So you can find OCinema on the web at o-cinema.org and on Facebook and all the social medias. And then as for me, you can go to my website, which is kareemtabsch.com, and I will spell that kareemtabsch.com, and you can see about my films which are weird stories about weird Florida, but wonderful. And learn more about me and reach out and tell me that you sat through this and how awful of an experience it was listening to my voice for an hour. And I will commiserate with you because I think it would be pretty rough too.
Well, Kareem, I really appreciate you talking to me.
Thank you very much. Thanks for letting me talk for so long.
Season 2 of Not About You would not be possible without the generous support of Walker West Music Academy in St. Paul. Walker West provides music education to any student who wants to learn, offering a variety of lessons for all ages and all skill levels. Go to walkerwest.org for more information. I wouldn't be able to make Not About You without the deep learning and guidance of folks that I've met through my time in the Sustainable Progress Through Engaging Active Citizens program, or SPEAK, based out of Hope Community in Minneapolis. Go to hope-community.org to check out all the amazing work being done at Hope Community. Support them if you've got the resources to do so. Season 2 of Not About You would truly not be possible without all the amazing folks who agreed to be guests and share their valuable time and considerable experiences with me. So go seek out their work and find ways to support them. And of course, this show only really has meaning if you listen and share. So thanks for listening. Now go share. Tell someone about the show. Share it on social media with the hashtag NAPOD. Post an iTunes review. Please post an iTunes review. Help me get these conversations out to more folks. The Not About You theme song is Rebels of Our Own Kind by Charlie Van Stee, used with permission from Charlie. This is Not About You.